I believe I'm live. Should be. Not sure why. Whoa, what is going on here? I believe I'm live. Some very green. It's the red shirt. Not sure why. Apologize in advance for the coloring. I just now realized the red shirt is throwing off my camera's color, but we are live and we apologize for being a little bit late to this episode of the Average Intelligence podcast because, well, there's a hell of a delay there. Eric is unable to join us tonight due to family stuff. No hatred, no hatred, no no not hating. We were just gonna skip tonight, but then I had an idea that I thought might be a little bit fun. So we're gonna do something a little bit different. And if you will bear with me, I'm gonna have to line myself up via YouTube, so there will be a slight delay. But as I do line that up, I'm going to go ahead and let everyone know that tonight's podcast is brought to you by our friends at Shopify and at Boger Cabinetry. We will talk about both of those a little bit later on. But today, and I think I've done this before, not on the show, but I did this a couple years ago, but I think they've updated it. I am going to be taking, I actually found two, so I'm going to take both and see how well well, not how well, but how I line up politically, because I think it's changed a little bit. And I highly recommend you take these two, just if nothing else, just for some fun. But the first one is the one that I have taken before, the politicalcompass.org test. And we're going to say English. So basically, it's 6 pages of they're very clear. They're not questions, they're propositions. So and I just now realized that you cannot see me, so or you can't see what I'm doing, so I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna move myself over a bit, which actually makes me a little bit more comfortable because I realize you can't see the questions. So we should be good. Just gonna make sure, and I might have to move myself again once we get to the other test. Make sure that I'm fully live here. Okay, just gonna make sure that I'm far enough over. I think, yeah, we can do better. We can do better. We can certainly do better. I know, buddy. My cat wants to be with me. Yes, I know. I'm talking smack about you. Yeah, we can do better. We can do better, Jake. We can do better. Okay, yes, now you can see everything. So, first proposition, if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interest of transnational corporations. You may have seen when Ben Shapiro did this test as well. And he rightly pointed out that a lot of these questions are worded, they're worded specifically to how would I word this? They're obviously written by people that lean more to the left, which is why I'm taking the second test too, because I don't know what theirs is, but okay, buddy, I will acquiesce your request. You can take the quiz with me. All right. So, but anyway, I will try to answer these as best as I can, but the results are probably going to be skewed because I'll be honest, on most of these propositions, my ideal scenario would not be available. But okay, so if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interest of transnational corporations. Well, see, that is presupposing that transnational corporations are inherently evil. And that's a sentiment that I don't agree with. However, I know what they're doing. So I am going to say agree simply because I do believe that it should be the goal of a transnational corporation to serve their clients and customers. But I'm not going to be so absolute about it. Spoiler alert, I'm going to be a probably slightly right-leaning moderate, possibly with some libertarian tendencies, but we'll see. So I'm going to say agree that they should primarily serve humanity, but insofar as humanity their customers are humanity, and if a corporation's not serving their customers, then they are not doing what corporations ought to do. The next one, I'd always support my country, whether or not it was wrong strongly. Well, I'm going to put disagree. And the reason it's not a strongly disagree is because there may be things that I don't agree. One example very recently was the Supreme Court ruling that Donald Trump could end TPS protections for specifically for Venezuela in this case, but others are set to expire that they've already revoked. I strongly disagree with that sentiment. However, it depends upon what the court's logic is behind that decision. It may be a case of where, unfortunately, the federal government has it's within the federal government's domain of responsibility to make those calls. And as much as I dislike and disagree with the decision, um, it is something that legally they're able to do. Now that being said, if you get into the extremes, then obviously I would strongly disagree. But like I said, the only reason I'm not going to strongly disagree on this one is because that and plus too, plus the fact that it is my belief that if my country is doing something wrong, particularly illegal, if it's doing something illegal, absolutely, it is my duty to support my country by pointing out these bad actors. So, but I understand again what this question is doing. So I'm going to say disagree, but not a strong disagree. The next one is no one chooses their country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. That's a strong disagree. That's a very strong disagree because not like this is assuming that your country is the one you were born in. There are plenty of proud Americans who were not born here. They moved here, they immigrated here and became Americans, and they're very proud of their country. So no, um, that's a foolish statement on its face. Yeah, it's not foolish to be proud of your country. That's insane. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. Ooh, that's a strong disagree there. Now, that question is, again, I understand what they're doing, but like, yeah, it's just, yeah, that's a big strongly disagree. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Disagree. There are many instances where the enemy of your enemy may be your friend, but there are many instances where the enemy of your enemy is not your friend. Someone should tell that to Donald Trump, who seems to adhere, at least today, be adhering to the logic of my the enemy of my formal the okay, now I gotta ooh, how would I word that? The former enemy of my enemy is now my friend, I guess. I don't know. Next one. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. I would say agree because, like virtually all laws, laws have the potential to be somewhat arbitrary, and it just depends. I'm not going to be an absolutist on that because an international law may be in place that, militarily speaking, is again not a good law. Um, but again, I'm not going to go with a strongly degree. Excuse me. I'm not going to go with a strongly agree because there are always exceptions to every rule. So, spoiler alert for the moderate coming. Next one, there is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I tend to agree with that. And it's not just the news media. So, there's a lot of, I'm a big, you know, how would you say that? Amateur history buff. And even insofar as that domain. There's a lot of movies out there where people believe that these are historical facts because they saw it in a movie. And everybody always makes the same case. It's like, well, it's Hollywood, man. Yes, but when you make it, particularly ones that are based on true events or based on a true story, and you're not accurate. Now, I get it, but it's a problem. So I agree with that, generally speaking. And then you add in the fact that the news today is very ratings and entertainment driven, so it kind of forces their hand. All right, we're on page 2 of 6. Next one. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Hmm, that's I think certainly among the developed nations, that's true. Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. And the reason I agree with that is because I actually think it was Andrew Tate that said it. I know his name is persona non grata, but he makes a good point. He was like, if you get the richest 100 people in a room, they're going to be from all different places, all different colors, all different creeds, and they're all going to have one thing in common. They're not talking about race. They are, however, probably talking about their wealth and things like that. Now, I'm not saying they're evil about it. I'm just saying that's not a line that they're divided by. So yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Next one, controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that because here's the thing: if you have zero unemployment, but your currency is worthless, it's it's because both are important, obviously, but I would say inflation trumps a little bit more because then even the unemployed who have aid or get temporary work have more buying power with that money. Alrighty. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Agree, generally speaking. If you look in the past, even in quasi-modern, mostly modern U.S. history, there have been numerous examples of corporations, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, doing environmental damage, and only through legislation have they been, or not just legislation, regulations is more accurate. Only through regulations have they been stopped. Look no further than removing the lead from gasoline. I don't know why I'm yawning so much. I'm not even tired. It must be a light. I think it is the light. All right, next prompt. Quote from each. Oh God, this is Karl Marx. Disagree. Okay, okay. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna because I hate communism. But okay. So this is the from each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. I'm not gonna strongly disagree. I'm gonna disagree, and the reason I say this is because it depends on the situation. I have often said that in very small groups, communism can work and a lot of times makes sense. For example, a family unit. If I have a family to take care of, I'm absolutely communist. I eat your heart out, Karl Marx. You know, the resources are distributed and very unequitably at times, depending on how young the children are. But in that instance, and even for a small commune, it can be sustainable. The problem is that once the bigger the group of people you get, the more human nature kind of rears its ugly head in lieu of the collective. So this is I don't think it's a fundamentally good idea either because it just depends on the people. But as we've seen historically, more often than not, it doesn't end well. The next problem is the freer the market, the freer the people. I'm going to agree, generally speaking. Obviously, the exception to this would be um, things like business getting in bed with government. And, there are no absolutes, I guess. But generally speaking, a freer market leads to freer people. Yes, I agree with that. The next one, it's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now bottled, branded consumer product. Um, See, I kind of wish there was neither agree nor disagree because I can see both sides of this one. So I'm going to say agree because I do think it's incredibly stupid that the fact is there are many places in the United States where the drinking water it's not like it's deadly. Oh, some places it is deadly. But like I don't drink my tap water, not because I'm necessarily afraid it's going to kill me, but because it tastes awful. It's not filtered to the degree that it should be. But on the other hand, I don't love the idea of us being dependent on brands like Coca-Cola, for example, for water. Uh, I think it's great but I also think it's great that it's an option, right? Because sometimes tap water is not available or convenient. So it's a thing that I think should exist, but the degree to which it exists now, I think is truly shameful. Next one, land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought or sold. Strongly disagree. If you don't own your land, then you don't own the thing on that land. So I believe in property rights. I think it's historically, it's pretty clear that that leads to a free, prosperous society, capitalism. So yeah, land should absolutely be a commodity that can be bought and sold. The next one is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Again, this question sucks because it's assuming that capitalism is evil. However, I am going to. I wish I had a slightly agree here. Um, Simply because there are a lot of people who are able to basically manipulate markets without actually doing anything, even tangible now. And it's a thing that happens. So yeah, I agree. It's a slightly agree. I'm confusing the hell out of this test right now. I do believe that in a vacuum, one ought to be rewarded more for actually contributing something to society. However, if you agree in free markets like I do, the market decides what's valuable, and when the market speaks, it speaks. So, next one, protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Again, I wish I had a slightly agree. I am going to agree, but this is one of those things that it just depends on the situation. For example, um, as much as people complain about the farm bill, um, you'd be very unhappy if we didn't have it. You would, because if you have a couple of bad harvest years, a lot of the American farmers may or may not, you know, bad things may happen. More American farmers have to do other things, and then all of a sudden we can have a, let's say that happens, and then a country puts a large tariff on importing certain crops. Like, let's say we have an extremely low yield of corn for years on end, and then American farmers stop growing corn. Um, and then another country that we import corn from imposes a large tariff, the cost of your corn goes dramatically up. Um, and then there's other examples of that, be that subsidies or trade protectionism. I don't love it, but I think it is a necessary evil sometimes. Next one, the only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Disagree. I think that ultimately the goal of a corporation is, or a company, is to serve its customers. Shareholders are a part of that, though, but I don't think it's the only social responsibility, for example. It also depends on the company, too. The next one, the rich are too highly taxed. Oh, this one's going to make people mad. I disagree. I do concede that the rich in this country are taxed more. However, people- oh, sorry, my fiance speaks Spanish, so whenever I get a text from her, my brain lapses into Spanish. So yeah, I do acknowledge that the rich do pay the bulk share of taxes. However, there are certain, and this is why I hate the rich, because it throws everybody into this group when there is a select few people that, through loopholes and other things and manipulations they can do, they they don't pay no tax, but they pay way less tax than they should based on their percentage tax bracket. Um, I think you could probably close some of those loopholes. I think the tax rate is probably okay, could probably even be a little bit lower, but if some of those loopholes got closed. So again, I wish I had a slightly disagree here. Hopefully the next quiz is a little bit more nuanced. So the next one is, those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Disagree. This is one of the things that my opinion has changed on over the past couple of years, in the idea of a universal healthcare system. I used to be vehemently against it, and I still am against aspects of it for the same reasons. Um, but that being said, if when it simply comes to spending and money, there's really no good excuse for the fact that the United States doesn't have something like that, or at the very least, a public option. Um, my biggest issue now isn't so much cost as it is just not wanting the government to be in complete control. Even if it were up to certain states, I'd be more okay with that, but that's a different topic for a different time. Government should penalize. Government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Strongly agree. But I think actually, you know what? I'm going to change it to agree simply because I think that if a business does mislead the public, then they can be sued. But I do agree that the government should penalize. But again, when you give the government too much power, who decides who's lying to the public? So that's why an agree, a soft agree. Next one. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. Oh, okay. Yes, I do agree with that statement. In fact, I strongly agree. Well, I agree with that statement because again, um, if a company does, which I'm not saying this has ever happened, right? But if a company takes care of its customers and creates a product that is so good that nobody wants to buy from a competitor, and those competitors go out of business, that means you win capitalism. But then when you win capitalism too well, you aren't allowed. There's a ceiling to success. So it's one of those things where in a vacuum, I would disagree, but seeing the real world potential effects of a monopoly and not trusting that humans will act against their nature of consumption, which is not a dig, but that is a thing that exists. I'm going to say, yeah, I think there need to be some protections for that. On to the next page. Okay, next one. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Okay, yeah, here's the tough one. I am only going to disagree simply because I don't think that question is nuanced enough and I don't like absolutes. And because I just don't know. I teeter totter on abortion as an issue so often. All authority should be questioned. Strongly agree. When we stop questioning authority, that is the first step to tyranny. Absolutely, all authority should be questioned. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. Strongly disagree. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. I am actually going to disagree with that one, and that might surprise some people. The fact of the matter is that there are plenty of. What are you doing? Why are my animals being weird tonight? What's your problem? I don't know what you're doing. I think education, for example, is a great example of that because it's not self-sustainable. Were it to be self-sustainable, they would have to charge more money, which means less access potentially to lower income kids or people. Um, so yes, I think there absolutely should be taxpayer funded education programs and places like museums and theaters because the arts are vitally important. That being said, I do concede that there are going to be some times where not only is a place not profitable, but it's not profitable because it's mismanaged or it's doing questionable things. Such as, for example, I don't believe that the Creation Museum should be taxpayer, and it's not, but that's just an example. The Creation Museum should absolutely not be taxpayer funded, nor could it be because it is a religious institution. So that's a whole nother can of worms. But schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Hmm. Okay, I'm actually wrestling with this one because, and I'm not proud of this, but certainly, and I assume they're talking about secondary education, like primary education here, because assuming we're talking about like regular school, like K through 12, I'm going to disagree only because kids that, like, there are some kids, nerds, who like to go to school, but many of them don't want to, but they are better served by being told that they have to go. and they are grateful for it later in life. I was one of them. I hated school when I was younger. From about middle school to high to I'd say most of middle school I really hated school. But obviously I'm glad that I went. So the next one, all people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. Absolutely not. That's ridiculous. Cultural um, exchange is one of the greatest things about Western. It's because of that that we even have Western civilization. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. I tend to agree with this. I don't. Okay. I think in a vacuum, you can raise a child without corporal punishment. However, sometimes I think it can be more effective. I do think some people can take it too far sometimes, but so that's a soft agree. I've seen many times in public where I think, like a good quick whack would deal with that situation. I don't think it's a good long-term strategy, but from time to time, I think it may be necessary. I'm not talking about like putting them in a hospital or anything. That's absurd. Next one. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. I think it's natural. I don't necessarily think it's good, but I do agree that it's natural. It's not a good thing, but it happens. See, that's another thing. That question is worded very poorly because I know what it's trying to do. But again, possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Agree. Um, and I'm only saying agree instead of strongly agree because I do think, again, you can take that to excess. The prime function of schooling should be to equip future generations to find jobs. I disagree. But it's a soft disagree. I do think that job preparation is part of that, but the pursuit of knowledge is its own endeavor that I think is worthwhile. And also, I think the primary function of school should be to teach children how to think for themselves and how to learn for themselves, because that will help you no matter what you do in life. Next one, people with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Disagree. Um, It's a tough one, but I believe in freedom. Um, so I'm not gonna touch that one. I'm not gonna touch the eugenics on that one. Because yeah, that's no people no, come on. No, that's ridiculous. We've been down that road. It did not work. And plus it's just fucking evil. Let's see. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Agree. I think that discipline is severely lacking. It was lacking for me as a child, and I'm paying the price for it in my 30s. Not gonna lie. Next one. There are no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. I disagree with that statement. Now, not in the way you think. I don't like that they see I don't like that they use the word savage. But there are cultures on the planet today that are far from civilized as we know it, just technologically speaking. And then there are cultures that we would maybe consider civilized in the sense that they have like cities and governmental structures, but those structures are evil just inherently, and they are certainly not on the same par. Like it's not a difference that's so minute that you would simply say, "Oh, this is a different culture." No, they're bad. There are such things as bad ideas. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. Agree. If you can work and refuse to, you couldn't get benefits. And for the most part, outside of fraud, that doesn't happen. Happens fraudulently, but outside of fraud, that doesn't happen too much. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Oh, I don't even want to answer this question because it depends. It absolutely depends on what's going on because sometimes thinking about a problem will help you solve it. So I'm going to disagree because if you have a trouble, you probably should think about it. First generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within the new country. Disagree. I know several that did it. So that's just a fundamentally true false statement. What's good for the most successful corporation is always ultimately good for all of us. Disagree. That's just an absolutist statement, so I disagree with it on principle. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Disagree so long as because I spoiler, I'm a fan of PBS and I think it should stay funded. I know that's contrarian to say, especially since most people think I'm a Republican on the internet. And most importantly, though, not just for me because I find value in it, PBS may be the only educational television that some children have access to, and that's because it's free over the airwaves and it's educational. And it might be somewhat politically biased, but I would say marginally speaking, I don't think to the point where that's going to turn somebody liberal, so to speak. Particularly the more independent the content, the less problem I have with it being publicly funded, actually. So let's go on to the next page. Page 4 of 6. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. I generally agree with that statement. See the Patriot Act. I'm not as alarmist as some people are, but I think it's demonstrably true that since the Patriot Act, our, you know, civil liberties have been curbed, even if slightly. Next one. A significant advantage of a one party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in the democratic political system. Oh God, a communist wrote this question. A significant advantage of a one party state. Yes, but see, this is assuming that the progress is good though. So I'm going to really surprise people. I'm going to say, but it's a factually true statement, or at least it can be a factually true statement. So I'm going to say agree on the merits of the sentence because that is true. It's one of the reasons why emergency powers are granted. It's the reason why the president is the commander in chief in time of war. If he had to get authorization for everything through Congress, we would never win anything because it would take forever just to get anything done. So I mean, it's a factually true statement, but it's faulty on its face because it's assuming that this is a good thing, and I don't think it's a good thing. I'm known for annoying people on both sides of the political aisle by saying constantly, "I love the gridlock. I like the gridlock of our system," but I digress. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need be worried. Strongly disagree because who decides who's doing wrong? A totalitarian state. If reading a wrong book is considered wrong and they surveil you doing that, no. Yeah, that's I absolutely disagree with that statement. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. I slightly agree on this, simply because again, we may not even if you're against the death penalty now, there may be someone in the future that does something so egregious that everyone agrees that that person is more dangerous alive than dead. So, in a civilized society, one must always have people. Sorry, in a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. Oh, I don't like the wording of this, but a hierarchical structure is generally speaking necessary. So I'm gonna agree only because I don't have a slightly agree. Um, but yeah, this has more to do with hierarchical structure. Because imagine a company where everybody just does what they want to do and nobody is uh, planning and executing the plan, creating the plan, executing the plan, and sending it down the chain of command. Imagine an army with no with no hierarchical structure. It wouldn't be very efficient. It wouldn't do anything at all. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. I strongly disagree with this. I just had a conversation yesterday on Toon Talk 2.0 about this. So, yes, I strongly agree with that sentiment. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Disagree. I think deterrent is the primary goal. that we should be striving for. But I think that if you can rehabilitate someone, particularly nonviolent offenders, I think that should be the priority. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. This is another one where I agree with the sentence, but I know what it's doing and I don't like it. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. So I'm going to softly agree with that. But I do think the majority of people can be rehabilitated if things are done the right way. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Strongly disagree. Well, I'm gonna disagree because it depends on the context. For example, if you're talking about wanting a grant for something, it depends. But this question is kind of dealing with inherent value of humans, so I'm gonna say disagree. But I do, depending on how you phrase the comparison, it's possible. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Ah, I hate the phrasing of that. I'm going to say agree though, and this is why I hate that question. I would say the same thing if it said fathers. And I actually think, now that I think about it, I think Ben Shapiro said the same thing. I think if this were reworded, parents may have careers, but their first duty is to be parents. And I mean, they're both homemakers. So yeah, I would say unequivocally, yes, I think that that is a parent's first duty is to raise their children and provide a home for those children. Whether or not it's a mother or a father is irrelevant to me, but the question says that. So obviously I'm for the patriarchy. Almost all politicians promise economic growth, but we should heed the warnings of climate science that growth is detrimental to our efforts to cope global. Strongly disagree because there is a lot of evidence actually that points to economic growth being the thing that's going to help us curb climate change. Because once again, I agree with the school of thought, which is actually from a UN report, that the best way to stop climate change is to get these developing economies developed. Because once a person is not worried about where their next meal is going to come from, they can start thinking long term. And the more long term you can think, the more you start to consider things like environmental impact. So, no, I strongly disagree with that. Next one, making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. No, not inherently. It depends on the establishment. So no, that's not universally true. We're gonna get to the last page, but first, do you have an idea for an online business, or maybe you actually already have an online business, but it's just not going that great? Well, fortunately for you, there is a place where you can build your online store or transfer your online store that has all the tools you could ever want to sell online. I'm, of course, talking about our friends at Shopify. Shopify is fantastic. I use it myself, hence why I am now, having them as a sponsor on this podcast. I've built a few online stores in my day, and let me tell you, Shopify is the by far greatest experience I've had. Not only was it the fastest, it was also the easiest, has the social media integrations that are a few clicks. It's so incredibly easy. You could literally build your online store in a day if you sat down and had time to put all your, items in. They even make that easy. Selling across multiple platforms has never been easier, and Shopify has so many tools to help you grow your business and advertise your items, which is key. That's the big one. Very little secret is the vast majority of your money should be going to advertising if you're starting or growing a business. And Shopify makes that extremely easy for you to do. Not only that, but their websites are just slick. Shopify Shopify's website builder understands that the simplicity of a site can make or break your sale. If you have to click through too many pages or the pages don't read well and everything's all jumbled, I've done it before. I've clicked off because it looks amateur hour. Your website will not look amateur hour with Shopify, with customizable templates and literally any tool you could possibly need, not to mention heavily discounted shipping rates, which saves you and your customers money. So what are you waiting for? Click the first link in the description and start building your online store with Shopify today. All right. Are we ready for the next page? Oh, I see. This was actually updated on April 15th, 2025. So they did update it. Astrology accurately explains many things. Astrology accurately explains nothing. You cannot be moral without being religious. Okay, so I do disagree with that. However, I do admit that a lot of our morality that exists secularly does have its roots in religious teachings and laws. So I do think you can be moral without being religious, but understand that a lot of the moral virtues and norms that we have today have come from a religious source. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. I agree. Um, the only thing is that charity is a variable there, but I do agree with that sentiment. Some people are naturally unlucky. Ooh, you know what? Some people may not know this about me. I am actually a little bit superstitious, and I actually agree with that statement. I think some people are just genuinely unlucky for whatever reason. Um, I agree that the vast majority of your life is based upon your decisions, but I gotta tell you, I think that's true for some people. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Strongly disagree. Oh, I guess. Oh, this is the finally a look at sex. Oh, okay. So I guess I miscounted. This is the last page. My bad. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. Disagree. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of adoption. Agree. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Agree. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Strongly agree. Consenting adults being key there. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Strongly disagree. I know people. That's like saying nobody can naturally feel strongly heterosexual. Like that's these days, openness about sex has gone too far. Generally speaking, I do agree with that. Looking at you, pride parades. Keep keep some of that indoors. All right, are we ready? Drum roll, please. That's the worst drum roll ever. Let's see. Oh, it's okay. Wait, where's my political compass? Really? I'm libertarian left. I kind of figured. I did kind of figure that. Huh. Oh, I can claim a certificate? My political compass is I'm economic left. I didn't see that coming. Huh. Interesting. Wouldn't have thought that. Oh, it says that I'm like Malcolm Evans. Oh no, Malcolm Evans draws them. So I don't understand who am I? Oh, that's why. Okay, this is from the UK. That explains it. Charge £5. I kind of had a feeling that it would say I'm libertarian left because I feel like I've gone left on some economic issues. So yeah, that doesn't shock me. I am still pleased to see the libertarian edge. I'm not a full-blown libertarian, but okay, let's try this one. This is Pew Research, so this might be a little bit. All right, only 16 questions. We got this. So this is the Pew Research political typology quiz. If you had to choose, would you rather have a smaller government providing fewer services? I would rather have a smaller government providing fewer services, as long as it meant less taxation. Which of the following statements come closest to your view? America's openness to people from all over the world is essential to who we are as a nation. If America is too open to people from all over the world, we risk losing our identity. I think America's openness to people from all over the world is essential to who we are as a nation because we started out as a nation of basically British immigrants intermingling and then immigrants from all throughout Europe. And then as we've grown, we've opened our doors to the betterment of our society. So, yeah, I definitely agree with the first statement. In general, would you say experts who study a subject for many years are usually better at making good policy decisions about the subject than other people, usually worse at making good policy decisions about that subject than other people, or neither better nor worse? I think it does depend on the person, but generally speaking, I mean, let's look at this on its face. If someone has studied a subject for many, many years, chances are they're going to be better at making a good policy decision than the average layman. Look no further than Trump's current Secretary of Homeland Security, who cannot define habeas corpus. Thinking about increased trade of goods and services between the U.S. and other nations in recent decades, would you say the U.S. has gained more than it has lost because increased trade has helped lower prices and increased competitiveness to some U.S. businesses, lost more than it has gained because increased trade has cost jobs in manufacturing? Okay, this is a can of worms that I'm still kind of struggling with. Um, in a vacuum, I am a fan of free trade. However, that only applies when all parties are playing fair. And I do think that philosophically speaking, this country has over prioritized cheap goods versus quality American made goods. And I think economically speaking, that's a part of it. It's not the only thing. I use the refrigerator example. So, for those of you who don't know, my day job is in cabinetry, which actually leads to the next sponsorship spot. Um, but I had a client a couple years ago who was redoing her kitchen, and she had old appliances from the 1950s, specifically a Frigidaire refrigerator. This fridge was built in 1952 and it still worked perfectly. Okay. Whereas we have a lot of customers that buy refrigerators today, and a good one will last you, like a really good one will last you like 10 years. But this one and the thing is, I've had refrigerators from the 70s and 80s that still work today. I'm pretty sure the refrigerator in my house was probably built in 1984 and it still works perfectly. Like there's nothing wrong with it. But all these new fridges and even cars, like oh my God. How many times have we seen an old beater car that still runs? Now, granted, it's been taken care of, the upkeep's been done, but like so many modern cars today, like you hit a bump and it just completely puts it on the fritz, and it costs so much to get repaired. So I do think that I think we've over prioritized cheap goods. However, I do agree that generally speaking, free trade is the way to go, barring the odd circumstance here and there. So I do think that we've lost more than gained because it's not so much increased trade, it's increased trade with people, China, who are, I shouldn't say people. I have no issue whatsoever with the Chinese people. The Chinese government, on the other hand, problems. But economies that sole purpose is to undercut manufacturing of other countries so that they could then get a foothold and then kind of take over that market and then steadily raise prices, the Walmart approach. But as I mentioned, my day job is in cabinetry, and I'm looking at you. You know your kitchen's ugly. Maybe it's not ugly, but maybe yours isn't ugly, but yours is definitely ugly. Fortunately for you, our friends at Boger Cabinetry can help you. Boger Cabinetry, we specialize in high quality all wood construction cabinets at a fraction of big box store prices, and I can definitely attest to that because I build them a lot of the time. And if you're looking for something a little bit nicer, speaking of American made, we have two made in USA, in fact, made right here in Indiana, cabinet lines, Amish custom, and then a factory here in Indiana providing Hoosiers with jobs, and they make a fantastic cabinet. Also give you a lot more color options than the sort of standard lines do. But regardless of what direction you want to go, Mention the Average Intelligence podcast, and no matter what kind of kitchen you're getting, that nets you a 5% discount, which on a kitchen is not nothing. I know it sounds low. Get your quote and do the math. You'll see 5% is a good savings. But on to the next question. How much more, if anything, needs to be done to ensure equal rights for all Americans regardless of their racial or ethnic backgrounds? Hmm. I'm gonna say a little, just because I think a lot of progress has been made. However, it's tricky because I don't think there are necessarily. Well, no, I take that back. It says Americans though, not people. So I'm gonna say a little because I think we can do better, but I think generally speaking, historically especially, I think we've come a pretty long way. Which of the following statements comes closest to your view? Business corporations make too much profit. Most corporations make a fair and reasonable amount of profit. Oh, see, this is not fair. Um, it depends on the corporations, right? So I think most corporations make a fair and reasonable amount of profit. How much, if at all, would it bother you to regularly hear people speak a language other than English in your public places? Not at all. In fact, I like to learn those languages. Es muy divertido que hacer eso. Y es muy divertido también que aprender idiomas. Sorry, I forgot the word to learn. On a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 means you feel as cold and negative as possible, and 100 means you feel as warm as possible and positive as possible, how do you feel towards Democrats? Modern Democrats, I say I'm probably about a 20. I think no, I'm gonna okay, so hang on. 20 is not my final answer. I got to think about this. So 50 is I just don't care. Yeah, I'm going to say 20. I think they're an important part of the how I feel right now, though. That's tough. That's tough to. I'm going to up it to 30. And because the vast majority of things the Democrats like and stand for, I think are not necessarily wrong, but it's kind of weird priorities. Right now, I'm a 10 on Republicans. I think they have failed just immensely. And the Democrats are sitting a little bit higher on my normal scale because they're basically what's part of what's stopping the Republicans from just fucking everything up. And I'm also really mad because I voted heavily Republican in the last election, and that's not what I voted for. So that won't happen again. Sticking to libertarians. Which of these statements best describes your opinion about the United States? The U.S. stands above all other countries in the world. The U.S. is one of the great countries in the world, along with some others. There are countries that are better than the United States. I think the U.S. does stand above all countries in the world, even though we fuck up sometimes. There are certain things in the United States that you just cannot, you don't have anywhere else, or absolute freedom of speech, um, barring certain things that are happening here. But generally speaking, I do think that we do stand above all of the countries in the world, and that's not to say that other countries suck. I'm just saying, and I know I'm being a biased American, but that is how I feel genuinely. How much of a problem, if any, would you say each of the following are in the country today? People being too easily offended by things others think. Oh God, that's a major problem. Get a spine. People saying things that are offensive to others. I really don't think that's a problem. Freedom of speech comes with consequences. Which comes closer to your view of candidates for political office, even if neither is exactly right? I usually feel there is at least one candidate who shares most of my views. Um, they usually don't deliver, but I would say there's generally at least one candidate who shares most of my views, I would say, especially if you include third parties. In general, how much do white people benefit from advantages in society that black people do not have? Ugh, this just depends. God damn it. I hate this question so much. What advantages? I'm only gonna say not too much because I think it depends on what you're talking about. And while I know this is rich coming from a white guy, but I don't think there are too many institutional other than incarceration rates, which I can't explain it, but statistically it is a thing that happens. I just realized, am I leaning out of the window? Yes, I am leaning out of the window. I apologize. So I'm going to say not too much just because I want to know what advantage they're talking about. Do you think greater social acceptance of people who are transgender, people who identify as a gender? Oh, there is very good for society, somewhat good for society, neither good nor bad for society, somewhat bad for society, very bad for society. Oh, God damn it. Uh, I think it's somewhat bad for society. I am all for people living how they want to live so long as they don't harm anyone else, and that's the key. Because and I could be wrong, in 20 years, somebody might look at this and say, I can't believe he was so wrong about this. I don't think I am, you know, but generally speaking, I'm all for an adult being able to, live how they want to live. Again, as long as they don't harm anyone else, but subjective biology is harmful. I believe personally. I think that when we start subjectifying even things that are concrete, that even not that long ago we would all agree on, like we've kind of come to a point where we agree, okay, yeah, sexuality might be a flexible thing. It seems like it is a fairly flexible thing, at least across a species, but gender is, sex is not. Mammals are, we're not bisexual. What's the word I'm looking for? We have sexual dimorphism, and there are two sexes in mammalian biology. That's universally true. Overall, would you say people who are convicted of crimes in this country serve? This question is not fair because it depends. It depends. Oh, I'm going to say too much time in prison, focusing mostly on nonviolent offenders and drug charges, specifically things like marijuana. So yeah, but again, that's a really unfair question. I don't like that. Which of the following statements comes closest to your view? Religion should be kept separate from government policies. Don't even need to read the next one. Absolutely separation of church and state because which church? In the future, do you think US policy should try to keep it so America is the only military superpower? It would be acceptable for another country if another country became as fuck no, no. No. US policy should, this is going to surprise some people, but I have logic here. US policy should try to keep it so America is the only military superpower. First of all, why would another country, even an ally, why would you want someone to be able to go toe to toe with you? That's stupid. Outside of competitive fighting, that's fucking stupid. And even then, you want to have a competitive edge. And secondly, I think this is something that doesn't get pointed out nearly often enough. Okay, if you want me to explain to you why I think the United States should be the uh, only military superpower in the world, or certainly the strongest one, let's review the facts. Nuclear weapons have been used twice in armed conflict. They were used twice by the United States and were never used again because of how devastating they were. There were many, many times where, had the United States used nuclear weapons, it would have ended conflicts a lot faster, but to the detriment of the planet and to many, many, many people. And I think that is something that should be pointed out more often, is the fact that the United States has the capability of using nuclear weapons, but we have not done it since the first ones were dropped. So I think that is worth pointing out. And the United States military, time and time and time again over decades, have shown, generally speaking, incredible restraint across the world. So I think that's worth more. So let's see where Pew Research says I fall. Ambivalent right. So wait, where? Where does that put? Oh, okay. There I am. I feel like based on those questions, that's probably accurate. Again, I want to be in the I want to be in the middle. That's where I like to be. Let's see what it says about me. On issues ranging from the size of the federal government to views about business, gender, and race, ambivalent right hold many views that are largely consistent with core conservative values, yet they also hold more moderate stances on several social issues like abortion and same sex marriage. And they differ from some of the segments of the GOP coalition in their more internationalist view of foreign policy and less restrictive stance on immigration. Ambivalent right are distinct from other Republican oriented groups in their views of Donald Trump, while large majorities of each of the other Republican oriented groups say they feel warmly toward Trump. Ambivalent right are much less likely to say this. Yeah, I would. Um, well, see, that's not true. I have a high degree of political engagement. Let's see. I answered, would you rather have a smaller go? Oh, okay. This is going. Oh, okay. This is cool. Well, which one's my answer? I guess this is. I don't get it. So I guess I'm siding with the majority here. Oh, I see. Eh, I tend to agree with that because really with me, and I know this about myself, it does kind of depend on the issue as to whether or not I'm a little bit left or right to the center. But I would say that's genuinely true. Well, everyone, I hope you had fun with that. I know I did. I always like kind of examining my political views. I know it's torture for most, but it's fun for me. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Average Intelligence Podcast. Apologize it wasn't a normal one, but we should be back next week where we're going to talk about how we were absolutely right about Joe Biden's health. And speaking of which, on that, I do it goes without saying, we hope that, his medical procedures go well and we wish him a full and speedy recovery. Nobody actually wants Joe Biden to suffer. That's, well, I mean, I'm not going to say nobody, but nobody that's not a massive dick doesn't wants Joe Biden to suffer. But anyway, I digress. We're going to be talking about how the Democrats and basically the media colluded with the Democrats to basically hide Biden's health from the public, and they failed spectacularly. But now it's all coming out, and they're like, "Oh, it's a shock," and it's like, "No, it's not. We were literally talking about it on this podcast." So check that out next week. And until then, check out Shopify and Boger Cabinetry for your online store and/or cabinetry needs. And we will see you guys next week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And we really need your help to go back and watch our old episodes to get our watch time up so we can get monetized so that we can bring you guys more content.